So, welcome to the Girls Club. This is the June episode number 8. So, that's 8 months now we've been doing this. And this month, we're going to talk about man versus bear and what this is all about, what we think about it, how dumb or awesome any of us think about it. And you could tell us your perspective in the comments. I'm sure you will. And so I've got a little bit of reading as usual, and we'll start with the first part of the reading, and then we'll move from there. So to share my screen, there we go. Now you see the writing. There you go.
There, perfect.
Okay. Okay, so let's do the first part of our reading and then we'll talk from there. So what I've written so far on this subject, let's talk about this new trend because it's certainly a trend, and it's like anything you see on Facebook, it gets all trendy, just like in the 90s when everybody wore overalls and headbands. It's the same level of trendiness to me. So the new trend of man and bear debacle of what would you pick if you were randomly magically apported into the forest for no reason? You just decided to be there for even though who goes out into the woods and the forest with no things to handle being in the woods of the forest with. I don't know. Maybe it's just too much logic for me, but to put out there. But so I personally had no clue what people were talking about for many weeks, which is true. I was like, I don't get it. Why is this a thing? Until I saw some clip of a woman who was being randomly asked this question. Up until this point, I thought it was just another silly bit of nonsense going around. And it turns out I was right. So the first time I heard it was an actual question being asked. My first thought, this is dumber than the what is a woman question. And it was also based on a hypothetical that begins with a fantastical basis. That is, a woman magically apports into the forest randomly for no reason, without any kind of normal tools or supplies that one might take camping or hiking with. Because who does that? So to me, these types of questions seem to be something that is just thrown out there into the internet to get people all riled up, confused, distracted from all the real stuff that is actually important. I see this as the parasite class doing their work here, getting people to stay out of focus with distraction, and triggered content is the same as distracting a child with a toy at the grocery store so you can shop in peace. So not only is it a question that is meant to drive fear of the unknown into women, with the villain being a human man, as a purposeful tactic orchestrated by the parasite class, I think, it is also disconnecting humanity itself, teaching us on a subconscious level that humanity is nothing but an untrusting species altogether. How many times are we going to be distracted in this way, knowing that this is a psychological trap? How long are we going to let the parasite class lead us around like dumb animals? I was dumbfounded when I finally got a clue as to what the man and bear was all about. The trend I noticed was that it seems that the majority of women who would choose the bear over a man are younger women who are the age bracket of 18 to early 30s, which there are exceptions to that. I've heard even older women chime in on this as well. This sounds about the right age of women who are also happen to be coming straight out of the indoctrination plant that is conditioning women to develop inauthentic traits such as modern day feminism, which is not what classical feminism is, woke ideologies, and atheistic, materialistic viewpoints, a Satanist dream come true. I see an ocean of what might as well be dead women within our human community. So that's the first part of our reading that I have written so far. So what do you guys think about that?
I do think it's something of a trend, and today we have Bryan, my honey, joining us for a masculine perspective instead of just our biased feminine perspective. So, what do you think, Glenn?
So a few things. So in regards to it being a distraction to put out, yes, I would agree with that. But I think what's more interesting to ask is why does the distraction work? Okay, so that's where I think that's where you uncover some more interesting um, psychology, and I think there's both positives and negatives, so to speak, that you could take from this. One, the I think the overall message or lesson that could be taken from this from a man's perspective, and that what women were trying to demonstrate is that they're saying they feel uncomfortable or unsafe around men. That's very much more of a Western phenomenon with Western women. That's not the case in other places in the world. Uh, but equally in the same way, and that's a fair point. You know, if you are afraid, having been through some trauma, fair enough to be cautious. There are dangerous people out there. I'm a father and a husband. I'm extremely protective of my ladies, for sure. I'm very protective of them, for good reason. But at the same time, I think the point was demonstrated in probably one of the most retarded ways it could be. Just to be blunt, when you think about that as an example, like if you just use critical thinking, you can tell people are saying that haven't actually like one had any experience in nature at all or understand. Like I lived in the woods for a few years hiking around and doing that, and like I've had like mountain lions try to attack me and kill me, and like when you have an apex predator coming after you, it terrifies me as a grown man. I was former Marine. I enlisted in infantry at 17. Like facing death is something that like my whole life, that's uh something I was willing to do, but it's still terrifying when something like that comes after you, and I'm a man. So, and then when you analyze like a bear, especially for example like a grizzly bear, it's like one of the most apex predators on the planet. Like that is a mountain of muscle. They have up to 1,200 pounds per square inch bite force, and there's a lot of square inches in those mouths. Like if you listen to survivors of grizzly bear attacks, like the way they crush you, rip you around, they'll rip the flesh off the top of your skull, and you'll feel it being scraped on. That is not a pleasant fucking experience. Like you're not going to survive that. Like even if you want to walk through, use a critical thinking exercise and say, oh, a random man right there, and you're worried about him attacking you. At least as a human being, you as another human being, you have an equal chance of harming them back or being able to fight back
Or survive.
You're not gonna you're not gonna survive a grizzly bear attack, like regardless
Probably
of you're
not.
a man or a woman. Like you said, the premise of it being like a little bit dumb in the sense that like a woman's not randomly good. There's not a lot of women in the United States that are spending a whole lot of time out in the woods randomly without someone, and even more than that, a lot of people will like to say and think they will do something in a survival situation, but instincts and fear take over. And I can guarantee that any human being, man or woman, if you're out in the woods and at the same time you see another human being, regardless of the sex, or a grizzly bear, the human beings are always going to band up. They're not going to have an interview process to see like, hey, do I like you enough to want to survive this situation? It's going to be an instinctual thing. So like those, there's lots of ways you could break it down, but really when you apply critical thinking to it, it was a terrible example. Using a better example, like a dog or something, maybe a little bit more believable, right? They would have had a better job demonstrating their point had they chosen something like that. And then we can get into the meat of the point, like the essence of what they were trying to convey, and break that down. And I think that would be useful. But what are some of your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great point. Like you know, the I think that was like kind of my a bit of my beef on it, where I'm like, it, I don't get why that's the question, and is that the people they were asking were not people who had first any experience being in the woods. Like they're not people you can
Yeah.
see going camping willingly. And nobody goes out camping without supplies or hiking without supplies. It just, no one's ever done that that I know of. I don't know people who do that.
Well, I think naive people may go wandering off into the woods without preparation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it does highlight like the naivete of this whole thing, right? That Bryan, I think you pointed out that the question implies a naivete about reality. And if a woman goes out into the woods unarmed and without any self-defense skills and without an awareness of the true nature of these predators, then that's naive. And there's a certain responsibility on you to be prepared to go out into the wilderness, right? And I think that I wanted to share, like, I really like what you had said also, Sarah, in what you wrote, and that there's like a setup in these social media kind of questions. It's kind of like the Me Too, where there's an invitation for people who are sincere in wanting to dialogue about a topic, right? But then it gets hijacked in this very false, silly way, and doesn't talk about the real nuances and realities of situations. Because I do think that there is a need to have a conversation about how men and the relationship and the trust between men and women have gotten so far astray, and how, many people have been violated, by men or other people that are acting as predators. It's like kind of comparing that, they're saying there's a predator class, and just as maybe, like similar to an animal that's a predator, and there are predators in human form. It's not just men.
It is
Right.
a relationship dynamic for sure.
Yeah. And so if we really, to actually have a real conversation that's based on mutual respect, rather than kind of setting it up in such a way that's like, men are bad, look how many people choose a bear, like it just becomes toxic, I guess.
I completely agree with that. I really kind of think generalizing only serves the purpose of sharing statistics for the sake of learning stuff. But, if you're generalizing so hard to the degree of like all men are bad, you're excluding and you're getting rid of the fact that we are all individuals. Same thing with people who hate on all women or all white people or all black people. When you generalize and you make that your worldview, you exclude the fact that we are all just people capable of making different choices. And it drives me nuts how we spoke briefly about this on our last talk, but how, things can get hijacked and there is that lack of nuance. And then it just becomes about, oh, well, men are so bad. And they didn't learn from the Me Too movement. That was a comment that I got when I had posted the meme of the polar bear attacking a woman in the water. Somebody said the same thing. And yeah, there's a lot to it. And maybe we could talk about what women can do, because like what Bryan was saying was like, why is this working? Like, why is this distraction working? We can maybe dig into what went wrong and maybe how women could heal if that is a desire that they have.
yeah.
Right. I agree with you that it is generalized. I just think it's another soapbox for victimhood, another place for women or whoever to come. I think I'm more interested in this whole masculine feminine thing, and what they put on it. And I think that, masculine feminine really isn't about gender. So if we could get down to that, it's a little bit deeper, I think, maybe than the question itself, but it is psychological still. Like I don't aim to feminize my children. like I'm aiming to masculine, you know, like we want them to come like away from the womb and then have some masculine. We've talked about this too, like not having the kids' fathers in their lives and things like this. And so they're missing kind of a piece that is really necessary. At the end result, though, when all goes bad and all fails, is like crazy girls making videos about man versus bear and how they're a victim, da 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 da, because there's no balance. There's no, you know. So that's a little bit of my thoughts on it.
Yeah. I feel like if they wanted to supply equal footing, they would have posed a second question that had to do with women, you know, women versus whatever, you know, they thought, and make it a little bit more equal. Like, you know, for men, you could do like, you could we were laughing because we thought you could pose the question for men, like men versus like, you know, souped up Marine woman who's like super buff and like has all the skills and whatever. I mean, because that would be just as dangerous as any other predator you might find randomly, women who are trained like that, they know how to handle themselves pretty well. But it's
I think it's also worth noting if we're speaking about predators, we have to remember predators come in many different forms, and especially when we actually want, if you want to dive into the world of like female predators and female psychopaths and serial killers, they're just as capable, or actually sometimes even more capable of harm than men because they can get away with it. People trust them. They don't suspect a woman. Many women that are serial killers are nurses. They're in positions of power where they're supposed to care for somebody, and they take advantage of that. So one, you're looking at a predator that is maybe more, the masculine predator is more outright, like, okay, I can physically see this as an intimidating threat,
directly aggressive.
Sometimes what is far more dangerous is the threat that you don't see from something that you think is safe. Women are very, men can commit abuse, but women are just capable of doing that too, and many times being able to lie and then cover that up.
Yeah,
they're capable of doing very manipulative things and absolutely destroying a man's life. So there's many men that if they want to, if we get into the generalizations, they could very easily say, "Hey, I've been through this experience with a woman," and then they could use this paintbrush and paint this black and white picture of everything over there. That would obviously be very unhealthy, and I think that's the same thing that's kind of happening in reverse here. Is that yes, some men are predators, but let's even dive into the world of sexual predators. And you get into things like sex trafficking. One of the things you'll actually learn that many of the people that are actually in sex trafficking, many of the traffickers are actually women themselves.
They build trust first.
Many of the abusers and pedophiles are actually women themselves. They're just as capable of committing sexual abuse and other atrocities as men are. And again, usually it comes about in a more manipulative type of way as compared to an overtly dominant type of way.
It's like masculine energy is like out there. It's direct, straightforward. A lot of feminine, especially psychopaths or more predators, they are more subtle. They're more covert. They build the trust, and it's more of a sneaky thing, a passive thing, than a directly aggressive thing.
And that energy can apply to both genders too. Even men that are like very feminized men, those are the worst men in society. They're the sneaky little cowardly cunts that just will go and do all sorts of terrible things and cry the victim. And that is definitely, I think, a huge problem in society. But we can also look at that yes, that there is a problem with abuse that goes on where men violate women and things, and even other men. I can speak to this as a child. I went through abuse, so I'm very cautious. I'm very aware of those things. But again, it kind of comes back to why the original question is kind of done. Like as a father, I would never leave my wife or my daughters with a random predator or a random person. Like man or woman. Like I want to just leave my kids with any random person, So, like when we played out, but I think it is good to dive into, that yes, women, there is some genuine grief, some genuine harm that I think needs to be addressed. And we need to do things in society that makes it to where if men are being predators, we ask ourselves why. Because obviously there's going to be multiple variables going in.
Yeah.
You could go all the way things back to the trauma that's induced on men from, a very early age with procedures like circumcision and other things like that. You can look at that in the relation to violence and crime rate in men that commit those crimes. You'll actually find a much higher rate of men that are circumcised and do that. So that could be a variable. We can look that 80% of men that are in prison were raised in single mother homes. And then if you look at still looking at the same statistic, children that were raised by both parents will have a lower rate, but children that were raised by single fathers will actually have the lowest rate chance of going to prison, even lower than children that were raised with both parents. So I think it's the lack of good men and the lack of good fathers.
Right.
And then if you have these women with toxic ideology raising the generation of men and traumatizing them, eventually you're going to end up with men that have a lot of hatred towards women.
Right.
And then they're going to want to try to take their power back. They're going to act in violent ways, and that could be through emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, whatever it may be. Some sort of control.
Yeah,
Women are using the family court system. I think I rant about this every show.
We're going through
They're using the family court system
right now
as a tool to be able to break down the family unit. It's over and over again. And so we have this horrible trickle effect. And then they stand on this pedestal like, oh, I'm a single mom, but the government has my back and I'm going to get you. So it's horrible. And so then we have these men that are going through extremely traumatic situations with their children or not being able to see them or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
It's horrible. It's horrible.
We're going through something very similar. Won't go into details, but women like this are very, very real and
very real.
It's definitely less spoken about. I don't know if it's because it's the nature of the feminine and it's more subtle, but I feel like we hear so much more about bad men than we do about the other side of the fence.
Yeah. I think you guys raised a point that's valid, that, the question poses this, like the threat is somewhere out there in the world, in the wilderness, but really where's the greatest threat? It's in the home, it's in the toxic nature of dysfunctional families and the toxic relationships dynamic, toxic relationship dynamics between men and women, the unpreparedness for even bringing children into the world, and then mothers. I'm a psychotherapist. I work with hundreds of people over the years, and I hear the most horrific stories about what mothers have done to their children, both male and female. And so, and often the biggest problem is the absence of the men in their lives, so I think that it's a setup question that's taking us away from the real problems and the real solutions.
Yeah, like I said, it's another soapbox, just like using the government, like, oh, I'm a victim, I need somebody to go and punish the other person.
Yeah, turning to daddy government when the little victim doesn't get their way. I mean, and that's bad in California, where California really likes to champion the single mother and just give them whatever they want.
Yeah, it's sick. There's no logic going on.
So I think another thing to highlight too, and this is something that to always bring anything that's kind of out there in the social atmosphere, bring it back to the foundation of natural law and the observation of this. And I think even in the question, it shows the more modern feminist mindset where it really is completely inverted and unnatural. So you think about like our species, how we got to the point we are. When we were, people that were developing early on, it was because there were strong men in a tribe that could take on those apex predators was the reason that like our species survived. Yeah. So like men are supposed to protect, they're supposed to be that inherent safety net. So working, in that question, the fundamental assumption that it's built off of is that men in general, all men are just predators, all men are dangerous, or so many of them are that you're better off to assume that they're a predator than to not. that's an inverted form of reality, and I think there's multiple examples when we dive into this feminist mindset that show that. Even for example, when one of the biggest things that you'll see, especially many on like the radical left, far more progressive leaning people, one of the main topics that they champion as women's rights is the right to abortion.
So
Now,
inverted.
I'm not saying
So
any
inverted.
whatever anybody's opinion is of it or anything. Think of in nature, and we could bring a bear example into this. One of the most terrifying things in nature is a mother bear with her cubs, right? Why? Because she will fuck you up to save those cubs. So the inherent part of nature for a woman then is to inherently protect her young so fiercely that she'll put herself at any risk. So why is it that with the radical left, that what makes them a woman, what gives them their power as a woman, is the right to actually
Abort their
to
child.
kill the child rather than to protect the child? So we get this inversion of reality, whether it's from the masculine perspective or the feminine perspective, that everybody is inherently dangerous, everybody's inherently evil. It's kind of like the concept of original sin.
Yeah,
we're
you're born with it.
just root human beings that are animals and instinctual, and we can't develop a higher conscious or have morality that makes us choose not to do terrible things. So I think really if we really want to understand the root causes of why the modern feminist mindset and other things like that, if you always dive back to the root of natural law, and you will always be able to find the inversion of what's natural and what's real in there. And when you find that, that's something twisted and you want no part of it.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and I would agree with that entirely. It is entirely inversion to be able to do that. And and it's almost funny thinking about the same kind of woman who would do that, like abort a baby, have a long-term abortion late in life. Um, and like they would just do that, but they're also like afraid of everybody else. So it's kind of like it's almost like you were saying, women who are predators, they are more under the radar about it. They have more of a, women or people tend to trust women more than before they trust men. And that's just because, well, the history that human beings have, where men have a certain type of presence, women have a certain type of presence, and so on and so forth. So these impressions get made, but it gets so crazy like that. I've said it before, the parasite class, these people, they're not creative, they're psychopaths. They don't have the capability of being creative. They don't have the tools in their brain to do it. So what they do is they take what we take. They take what we create, and then they invert it and they corrupt it and they manipulate it, and they do something jacked up with it. They do whatever they want with it. And it turns into, like, the Me Too movement was about trying to bring awareness to that certain problem, and then look what it turned into, this toxic whole thing. So
and then it creates a culture, like this social pressure, social culture where people are afraid to even voice a different opinion because they'll get attacked or they'll be criticized. And so many men are like mute about it because, it's almost like you don't get a right. You're a man.
Or they get shut down if they do even bother to try to voice their thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of in Tolkien's work in the Silmarillion, when he's speaking of Morgoth, and I'm not sure if you guys have read that or not, but one of the things there is that there's nothing he can create. Evil doesn't create anything new. It twists and works. Even the orcs, the goblins, at one point they were all originally elves that were captured, and I know I'm getting nerdy here, but the same concept applies, that that evil twists things, it inverts them, it can't create, so it does things, and I think the personification of that is the trans movement that we see. So you can't, that is the epitome of not being able to create. right? You're taking something and then you're having to twist it and shape it and do all these things. And even when you look at their ability to then procreate, their ability to actually pass on their genetic material, they can't do that. So it's moving into that epitome of being this twisted, warped form of reality. And that same mindset that's in that movement and radical feminism, these are all inherently intertwined together. And they're pushed by the same people. We can see, even questions like this we were speaking about how it plays into the destruction of the family unit. Well, when we really go and study the historic record, you can see one of the main tenets and goals of communism, when you study the work of Karl Marx and others, it is the destruction of the family unit, which is why ideologies and things like radical feminism and progressive movement, all these other things that are shoved out in there for people to, very young, ignorant, gullible minds to kind of latch onto. And then they become radicalized by these because it attacks everything that is natural. It attacks, the natural family unit of a husband and a wife that care for each other and produce healthy offspring and raise those to continue to do that. That's what every species on the planet, to some extent, they're supposed to be, pairing together in order to be able to pass on their genetic material so their species can be successful. And when you look at, the movements of, especially coming, from these more radical, left-leaning progressive ideologies, you absolutely see this culture of death around it. That people are evil, people are a plague on the planet, or, men are a plague on the planet, white people are a plague on everybody else, straight people are oppressing the queer and trans people, on and on and on. It's ways for them to be able to find a way to claim to be the victim, but actually step into a place where they actually become the oppressors because they're forcing their ideology on everybody else.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And it's funny that you put it like that, because what people don't like, they don't understand that they're not creative, and so they're taking all of the people who are kind of, like people who are trans or people who are homosexual or people who are just like anybody kind of off the normal track, and there used to be like a business for that called the Carney business, like P.T. Barnum and all that was like, where people made their careers. But that whole thing has just been the whole movement of it has been completely taken over. And now you can't see the authentic within the inauthentic. And it's going to be a problem for anybody who's like, born a little bit quirky or like.
Well, and the internet just blew everything up. All of a sudden, everybody was connected to everybody in a millisecond, and we can get on and talk like this or just scroll through our Facebook. And so everything is projected at a million times the rate that it was in the 30s or the 40s. You know what I mean? It's totally different than it used to be. Not good.
Yeah, and we kind of have to become more disciplined and hold ourselves accountable if we don't want to fall prey to stuff like that. And we have to be the ones who are in control of our consciousness. If we feel like we're going in a bad direction or something, like that's on us to like realign ourselves where we want to go. But I love the point you brought that up last time, Brittany, about how accessible everything is. And it really is kind of changing the course of humanity. Something that people might have just talked about casually, oh, would you rather come across a bear or a man in the woods? It exploded, all over the internet. And right. I don't know, I guess I heard it started on TikTok. I first saw memes on Facebook.
I had no clue until you guys brought it up.
I think another purpose of it, especially if you were to analyze this question specifically, like a root cause is in separating and dividing men, making them seem as if they're predators. When And that's absolutely what the globalists want. If they want to take over any society, they have to get rid of the men, because we're the ones that will go like put metal to meat and
Get it
fight
done.
and literally like, okay, we're gonna lay down our life or we're gonna string you up in the street for your crimes.
Yeah.
It's men that do that. It's also if you need to destroy men in society, you need men being raised not like men, and then being nice. But it's I'm sorry, there was a point I was getting to that I might have spaced off and forgot there. But yeah, I'll let you go ahead. It'll come back to me in a second. Sorry.
I love you. Yeah. Okay,
All good. I think another inversion is just when I think about, okay, man or bear, I'm like, if there's a bear, I probably want my man.
Yeah.
That's like, I go right to that. I'm like, I probably wish Brett was with me and I wasn't alone. So
Yeah.
I remember what it was.
Got it.
Yeah, so one of the things too is that specifically with the trans movement things, you can see a very strong correlation between groomers and pedophiles
Oh, yeah.
in that movement. Okay,
oh yeah,
it's riddled with it.
sick.
Well, one of the reasons why they need to demonize men is because it makes the children more vulnerable. If you actually go and listen to interviews of people who are predators, one of the, this is one time, and he said one of the things he would say, he would always check to see, okay, is that kid wearing like clean clothes? Does it look like they have a good family? Does it look like they're neglected? Do they have a father figure? He said he would always check to see if they have a father figure. If they did, he wouldn't try anything, especially if he would specifically say if it was a strong masculine father figure. He would never even try anything with that child because he wouldn't want to risk getting caught, experiencing the consequence of that father and that. So when you demonize men and make them predators, you actually remove those who can protect society, leaving children and women more vulnerable to the actual predator class.
And
Yeah.
if a boy is raised by a single mom or a very left-leaning woman who does demonize men, especially masculine men, and they project this hatred in every sentence that they speak, why would that
feminine to get accepted?
Why would that boy want to grow up to become a strong masculine man when in doing so, his mother, he will eventually become rejected by his own mother.
Yeah.
And as a vulnerable child, most kids just want that love and validation from their parents, both of them. And if you don't have that, that can give you fear, and that can absolutely impact what kind of choices you make. And there are many little boys in California who just want the love of their mom, so they'll go put on a dress, they'll go do this and that. And we have these massive generations of kids being raised by single mother homes, and we're kind of contradictory as a society. We want men to treat us right? But then we're going to go crap all over them. They want masculinity, but not too much, not this way, not that way. And there's just so many mixed messages going out to our children who are going to grow up to become adults. And you can see how that starts very young and adds into adult, or grows and blossoms into adulthood.
Right.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah, that's exactly right. So I hope people are listening to this and taking this in and being like, well, especially with women and just how, like, I mean, and it's almost like, I kind of feel like a lot of women, they're not doing it on purpose. It's just conditioning, and some of them might be, but it's like it's like talking to people who are lost. And you're trying to, like, I always try to see where I get, like, if I can get to the meat of how they really feel, because sometimes you can actually dismantle that and give them some perspectives where they'll go, oh, okay, and they'll be more receptive to you in that way. And I try to do that with people sometimes, because it does make me kind of sad sometimes that, women just don't trust. A lot of them just don't trust anything. They don't trust, I mean, they barely trust themselves to even be who they are authentically, much less anything else.
Yeah, a layer of the distraction is maybe just disassociation, a personal disassociation from reality. So I'm going to grab onto this question, this topic, I'm going to stand on it. And we're not going to talk about my trauma, my problems, my issues. We're not going to deal with any of those. I'm just going to jump on with the
Wear a
collective.
victim badge.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where's my button? Look how pretty and shiny it is. It even has a rainbow. It's like, it's a horrible, but it's a disassociation from reality and conditioning and a lack of, I think, masculinity, healthy masculinity in homes on a rapid, horrible scale. Just, it's massive.
Yeah.
You're wanting to say? There's definitely something I want to say because Sarah had mentioned, there's such a lack of trust. And I highly encourage people to go and learn about the attachment styles. Many people have attachment styles, which are basically how you handle pressure and how you handle stress. Many people are avoidant. There are also many people who are anxious, and I think there's definitely one that's like bipolar. That's not the appropriate term. Dissociative. Go look into it. But the one that you want to have is secure. You want to feel safe and secure inside. Like that. If that is your dominant imprint when stress occurs, then that is how you're going to respond. But a lot of people don't know anything about this. This is why victims wear their badges of honor and then they fight for their limitations, is they don't have that sense of empowerment whatsoever. And they will never have that if they feel insecure inside. Yeah. And the only way to build that security and trust is to work on that. And so that means going through uncomfortable, stressful situations and talking yourself through it. Letting yourself know that you are okay. This situation is different. And not only just the inner talk, but I think boundaries are extremely, extremely important. Because if you don't have any of those, then anyone can violate you. This predatorial person can violate you. This person can. And then all you can do is whine and complain about how bad that person is. But if you take personal responsibility and personal accountability and you don't ever allow them to violate you, then you have nothing to complain about. You are safe and you are secure and life is fine and dandy. And I know that's a summation in a nutshell, but I had to mention that because I think so many people are locked in victimhood and it's easier to point the finger on the outside than to be accountable and do the inner work. And what were you going to say?
It's a good point in the sense of you don't want to allow yourself to be a victim. That's the thing about predators is they can tell when someone is a weak person, a vulnerable person. Like I was mentioning with the one, when he scopes out children, are their clothes dirty? Are they well maintained? Do they have a healthy family? The same thing applies in nature. That's why the porcupine is less likely to be eaten, than something that doesn't have anything to defend it. Because it's going to cost, there's more risk for the predator. So you have to make yourself, if you are a person or a woman that you feel like that, there are plenty of ways to learn self-defense, to arm yourself, especially in the West, you're allowed to be armed here. There's, lethal things you can arm yourself with. There's non-lethal. I mean, there's an endless amount of options. And even just the energy you put off. Are you a confident person? Like, predators don't just immediately pounce. They will test, especially human predators. Like, so they'll test. They'll say a comment. They'll put looks. There'll be some sort of thing. And if you go along with it or you don't immediately address it or reject it, then they say, okay, so I could push that far. How much further can I get? And that's the way it works with any person who's violating any type of predator. They're going to test their boundaries and see how far they can push. The best way to protect yourself is just to have those good, healthy boundaries immediately to where people know you're not a victim. You have a strong sense of self and you're willing to defend that sense of self. And that alone is the best defense you can have.
That is a great point because people don't think about that. They will, like human predators, they will push at those social norms and see what they can get away with, even just verbally or with like little kind of hand movements, like maybe they'll, touch your arm or your leg or something like that, as a stranger and
And if
stuff
they
like
don't,
that. And if you don't go, what do you mean by that? Or like, what are you doing? They'll continue to go further with it. And the other point, like what you guys were talking about, like the hyper victimization of this, and what my husband likes to say is like it's become this like whole social like popular, it's like a trendy little popular thing to be a victim in the first place. So it's like it's a race to the bottom. Who can be the most, insane? Who can be the most like mentally ill or the most fearful or the most, who could be the biggest victim in this lot? And it is, and that's a good way to describe it. The way he does it is it's a race to the bottom, and they're proud of it. Some of these people are actually proud that that they don't understand that it's a weapon that's being used against not just women but everybody, and it's being used against our women, our men, and especially our children. That mental illness is this like big, it's nothing to be ashamed of. And what kind of mental illness do you have? And I mean, like I know it's like a problem everywhere, but they certainly do it with the young kids who grow up with chronic conditions. And like I've seen that since the 80s. I've been seeing that. And it's only recently that I've seen it more branching out into the world, like on a large scale. But I've been seeing, especially the authorities we're supposed to be able to trust, um, you know, talk to children in a way like, oh, well, you need a psychologist, right? You need a therapist. We're going to send one to you so that you could talk about how, unhappy or disturbed you are about this, and like putting it into the kids' minds that they are unwell to begin with.
That's what I was kind of thinking, is that they kind of, by going and running to therapy, it pretty much implies that something is wrong with you. And kids may not consciously have the logic to understand that, but something in them does. And as they grow, they kind of, people hold on to that. And now they're kind of using it as a bragging right. Oh, I have this, I have this, I have this. And for people who are like that, who may be listening, I'd like to challenge that thought and ask, is that really what you want to become? Is that really how you want to be? At one point, I had a mental breakdown due to not eating, and my mind snapped. And my ex was trying to pressure me to get on disability. And I actually had, even in a mental breakdown, I couldn't let that happen. I said, man, if I say that I am disabled, what does that mean? So people, ask yourself, those badges of honors, those things that you're claiming, what does that mean? And for me to say, oh, I'm disabled, means that I can't. To me, to accept disability means that I will never be able to collect a check or earn more than what disability provides to me. So for people who have all these conditions, who are like, yes, I have depression, yes, I have anxiety, I want to encourage you to think, is that really a good thing? And is that really your fullest potential? Is that the same story that you want to tell for the rest of your life? And I want to encourage people to instead ask themselves, what is their potential? And go find the answer to that by testing yourself and trying things out.
I'll chime in on this a little bit, because I work in the field, and I do agree that I think the mental health therapy world is really being pulled into this dysfunction and romanticizing or normalizing mental illness, and promoting, medicine or pharmaceuticals as the answer, sort of allowing people to stay only part way up their personal growth potential, and to see themselves as a victim. There's a lot of emphasis on the stories of how fair life has been, how for the underprivileged, how, creating a division between the privileged and the underprivileged. Really, a lot of people just kind of making it cool to have a diagnosis, whether it's autism or, like you said, these other diagnoses. So there's really not, it's not cool in like the professional circles to call out personal responsibility.
Very
Or right. And ultimately, I can't say that's true in the way that all therapists do their work. I think probably most therapists actually,
there are definitely good ones out there,
are trying to go against that. But the system itself is very diagnosis driven. It's very, there's a lot of assumptions made around that. And
based.
What's that?
Prescription based.
Yeah.
For the rest of your life and pay us forever.
Yeah. Oh my God, you're going to get off your antidepressant. I don't think that's a good idea. You're going to, if you ever get a label of psychosis, God forbid you ever decide not to take your meds, and there's a lot of assumptions made. And again, it's going away from the individual, I think, and really romanticizing dysfunction as if that's normal, but it's not. There are causal factors to the mental health problems that we have, and they are not being addressed. They're being perpetuated further.
Yes.
So, yeah.
They are. I think society, even to kind of back up a little bit into Brittany, was so racism and hate crimes, and we have all these things that are just like in our culture, right? Even, Pride Month and all this stuff. And so children are looking and they're aimed to have empathy for these people. And then they side with them and they're like, oh, but I could be that too. I can identify as a cat also. And then I'm part of this group that's getting all the attention. And then it's like snowballing. It's a snowball effect. It's horrible. It's sad.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly tragic that people are championing in this kind of thing, especially with their children, just because to raise a child like as if the special thing about them, as if the thing that is important about them has something to do with how they identify, how they are, like whether or not they're mentally ill or not, whether they have some kind of chronic child's condition, whether or not they're sick in this way, that way. To highlight that, like, this is why you're special. This is why you're important. That, I mean, I would only call that child abuse, in my opinion, because none of those things is what makes that child special. What makes that child special is that they exist. They exist. They're a fraction of spirit or source or God or whatever. You created them. The majority of us, we, even if we accidentally create them, or we create them on purpose, it's always for a reason. And I mean, they're special because they exist at all, and that they are here with us, and that they're human beings, and that they get to experience this like beautiful life on this planet. Like we have a paradise planet out there, and how many people are actually appreciating it for what that really is, and appreciating the person for the human being, instead of appreciating them for the weird, quirky, whatever thing that just happens to be also part of their lives. It just, I don't understand that kind of mentality. Like, I just don't get how people do that. And, so, I mean, I just feel like that is just terrible to do to a child, because you're pigeonholing them into an identity that they may not want to be known about. It's just, it, you know, there's other qualities that they have besides those things.
I also think that and actually it's not just a think, it's a statistical fact that most of the children who are coming out identifying as trans are doing so with uh they have single mothers or mothers who are like very far like radical leftist, and they will use their child, whether it's autism, ADHD, they're trans. They use their child as a trophy. It's not just about can you get a as many victim points as you can. Well, I also have children that are have all these things too, so that makes me more special, or that gives me more insight, or whatever it may be. And again, it's that inversion of natural law and what should be in reality, like a mother using her child and potentially like physically harming them for the rest of their life, not to mention emotional and psychological damage, instead of protecting them. And they're doing that, instead of the mother laying her life down to protect her child, it's I'll throw my child under the bus so I can get more social recognition.
Yeah. It's the modern day. I mean, it's all, you could almost equate it to like modern day Munchausen syndrome,
Yeah.
if I'm pronouncing that right. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like a whole different kind of psychological level. And yeah, these women, it really, it's the same kind of women who don't have all of their emotional baggage in check, that they don't have that thought, emotion, and action balanced within themselves. These are all the same women who would potentially do this to their children. They would abort their children at late term, 7, 8, 9 months. They would use their child. Oh, my child. Oh, goody. My child is sick. My child is autistic. Oh, my child is, this disease or that disease or whatever. Oh, let me get like a sticker and put it on the back of my car because I'm proud of it. I'm proud that I want to display it for the whole world so the whole world can go, oh, you're special then, aren't you? Because the parent is making it about the parent's making it about them rather than it actually being about the child. And that's one of my big, I guess, triggers, Brian, is what you're bringing up there is like women and fathers, not as many, but I've met one or two of them, but fathers can do it as well. Men will do it as well. I've only met, I don't know, one or two of them who I've actually seen do this, but women are primarily the people who will do this because, again, they're the sneaky predator. They go in under the radar, and like, children trust their mother. Children want to trust their mother. Like it's a natural instinct to go running towards our mother. And I mean, you would want that to be for both parents, but like, I think even children have a natural instinct to know, where does my mother stand? Where does my father stand in my life? And that creates that, healthy balance. So yeah, that's great that you brought that up, that women are doing that as well.
Yeah, I mean, and it really gets down to the point that it's like that type of thing. That what does that create? It's creating damaged men. It's creating a damaged society. You're creating more people that are not only not going to be able to reproduce, but if they ever get the chance to raise children through adoption or whatever, they're going to destroy those children. So if you want men that are protectors and things, you need to raise masculine men. Not that, and when you see, especially like with the trans movement, why you see it's mostly what we're doing is because if there's actually men who are real fathers, they fight that. They'll go to court. They don't allow it to happen. But it just creates the conditions, like it's a vicious cycle where then women don't trust men, or like the same thing with women, like you mentioned earlier, like with the custody battle thing, women that will deliberately keep children away from men. Now, there's also the case that like if a man is actually harmful, if he's harmed a child, if he's a terrible act, if he's dangerous or something, there is a time where a woman should say, no, I need to protect my child and keep him away. But when a man is not a dangerous predator or any of these things, and then a woman is keeping the child away out of spite, she's setting that child up for failure later as well by removing him from his father figure. You're keeping that child less safe because he doesn't have that father figure around. all of these different types of things, and we're seeing a lot of these behaviors being perpetrated by what women that have extreme mental illness. Like, and statistically, you can look at it, especially like more of these women that are, again, more far left, more progressive, feminist leaning women. They have very, very high rates of mental illness. The diagnosis of mental illness among them, many of them will have 2 or 3 conditions. Many of them like cluster B type personality disorders, these type of things. And then because they have that sick mindset, they go and project that onto their child. They'll destroy their family. They'll rip the child away from their father, and they'll do these type of things that are just as harmful. And then you end up raising a generation of men that are broken and wondering why these men keep reoffending in society. Well, they're enacting out their same pain. So I really think, if women are wanting to point out and say that, men are so dangerous or men are so predatory, well, that's a very newer phenomenon, and that perspective of men. Well, let's look in the most recent decades, and we see the vast majority of men are being raised by single women. The men that are having problems, the men that are offending and doing these things are raised by single women. So where is women's responsibility for saying, hey, we're not going to rip children away from their fathers?
Yeah.
We're, maybe pick better quality fathers and better quality men to have our children with. We're going to raise strong children. We're going to allow those men to help raise new men for the next generation, so we don't just have a bunch of predators or a bunch of weak little boys that can't do anything to benefit society.
Yeah. I just want to say too that I think that women, all parents who are single parents and raising their children, need to be very careful about the stories that they tell about the other parent, because it's the poisoning of a child's mind about the other parent is one of the more detrimental things to a child's development. And that was highlighted to me by a mentor, family therapist named Braulio Montalvo, who was, an expert family therapist who had a passion for children, and the attempts at trying to help parents provide the appropriate, proper, foundation. And it was that mental poisoning and the storytelling and the bitter bit that comes from the bitterness of let's say in this case a mother's anger towards her partner who let her down in some way, and projecting that onto everything, and then telling a story that gives that father a very unfair puts him in a very unfair situation, because the child is hearing those stories throughout their life and seeing their father in a certain way that's often not based in reality. It's not balanced.
Yeah. I mean, there is a little bit about that. I think in California, at least, there's it's not often used because they don't like to highlight it, but there was a I would call man's law set in place where the psychological trap of they'll evaluate. It's not often used, like I said, because they don't want to give men too much power in the courtroom, but where mothers, they found out mothers specifically more often or so, the mothers were trash talking the fathers. And there are situations where the fathers are trash talking the mothers separately behind the other parent's back to the child who's 5, 6, 7 years old. And if you can prove it, you can take the other one down. And I'd say in that kind of situation, you really do need to be very vigilant. But this is where we, as stewards to our children, we need to be paying attention to what's going on. Pay attention to what your children are doing, what they're saying, how they're behaving. Doesn't matter if your life is busy. It doesn't matter if you work multiple jobs. It doesn't matter if everybody in the house has to work. It doesn't matter if you don't have your kids sometimes because they go to public school. Or when you're paying attention, you can be as busy as you want and still understand your child and what they're doing, what they're saying, how they're saying things. And just their general stance, it's not as difficult as people think. And I've heard this before where parents are oh, I can't do everything all the time, and I can't be there all the time and pay attention to every single thing. I'm but you were they're I can't be responsible for all this stuff. And I'm like, but you were responsible enough
To
to
have
have the
sex.
child in the first place.
Yeah. I'm going to the bathroom, but I'll be right back.
So
What do you think?
it's like I see that argument a lot, especially with like people who want to, pro abortion and champion abortion. And it's like they just see it as a right to, do whatever they want, own their own body. Like, oh, I own my own body. Yeah, you do own your own body. But, if you were responsible enough to have sex and get pregnant, just understand 42 days after conception, there's a heartbeat, there's a brainwave, there's a living human being that is developing there. You can hear it, on a brain level and a heart level. So it's like but that's not what is considered here. That's why they think I've actually had women tell me that it's not a human being until the government gives it a social security number. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah, that's pretty far gone. I would say it's
Yeah.
a fairly easy argument to kind of defeat on the whole my body thing, because if it was true, if that was your body, whenever they removed it and ended its heartbeat, you would cease to exist too. But the fact that it's that heartbeat stops, those brainwaves stop, and you don't cease to exist as well. Is that, and another thing about that specific crowd is most of the people that, especially like that are like radical pro-abortion, and I'm not talking about like your average person with a moderate decision, your position on it, right? That's kind of nuanced. I'm talking about like the radical feminist. It just goes to show you like just how much they haven't really thought it through.
Yeah.
It's like I said, it's like if you're studying biology and then when they're learning, like Bruce looked when they were doing research on cells for epigenetic research, and they realized like when they removed the nucleus, the cell didn't die, and they were under the assumption before that the nucleus was the brain. But if you remove that and it doesn't die, obviously it can't be the brain. Well, the same kind of logic can apply here. If you remove the heartbeat, but then you cease, you're still there. That doesn't work. And most of the people that are like radical in that perspective, they're all people that somehow were lucky enough not to get aborted themselves, right? It's like the people that are pro-abortion all were people that were lucky enough to not get aborted themselves.
I know, lucky day.
And some of the people have that. Some of the people will say, well, like I didn't ask to be here. A lot of them actually hate life themselves. And that's why they're okay with all that death, is because it's their projection of their own hatred of life. And the radicals like that, they have higher rates of mental illness and depression and things like that. They are not a happy crowd of people. So that's why they also end up being a death cult, and they'll go along with whatever it is, from abortion to jabs to we need to get rid of people because of climate change, whatever it is. It's all about that projection of their own self-loathing and self-hatred of humanity that they put out onto everybody else.
I agree, and I would add that a lot of people in that specific category don't have a connection with themselves or a sense of purpose. So when you're lacking those things, you become very malleable to all of the programs that are out there, and it's very easy to jump from cause to cause to cause, without that connection to yourself and understanding yourself on a bunch of different levels and having a sense of purpose and direction in life. If you don't have that, you hate everything, you're just going to fall in line with whatever hot topic the media picks.
They want to they want to celebrate how different and unique and special we are, but really we're all falling into this like engineered mind frame of we're all so different, we're all exactly the same, so there is no like real uniqueness there going on. You're really just the same as everybody else when you fall into that trap. So I wanted to see if anybody has some like last thoughts on this. So Leslie.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how when we have a bias, a belief system, a worldview that we're holding on to, we will selectively look for data in our environment to make it true. right? And exclude anything that doesn't. And there's a lot of that going on where people are allowing their emotional biases, often based on their own traumas or personal stories and their victimhood or whatever it might be, right? That then becomes, the lens that has blinders on. And so they're not doing the real trivium process, and they're not doing the real self-work to actually seek truth rather than validation of their bias. So I wanted to point that out. And I think this relates to the other point I wanted to make around the court system and how people are just deferring their responsibilities to learn how to communicate with another person that they disagree with, or resolve a conflict, or think outside of their own discomfort for a higher purpose, or for something that's more important than them as an individual, which I would say our children are, right? Our kids should be, considered. When we have a child, we are then signed up basically for a great responsibility where that well-being of that life up to certain age where they, kind of are launched into the world, we have responsibility to that being, right? Before other things. And I think a lot of adults are not taking on that full responsibility of adulthood and staying like children themselves, and allowing the government, the courts, the mediators to be the adults somehow. And it's like a real willing giving up of your own personal freedom and and giving up your own rights when you step into that court system and that world, and allow yourself to be treated like a subject who has to follow the directions of some external source, rather than going back and learning, how do I work together with another person who I made this being with, and how do I create boundaries and set parameters and find compassion and be willing to look at myself, right? It's complex. People don't want to do that work. And I think at the bottom line, that's kind of validated by these memes and things and these little sideline discussions, is it's really avoiding the ultimate truth of people coming back to themselves and how they got where they are. What are the skills and that they don't have? What are the responsibilities they're not taking? How do they themselves set themselves up to be more empowered in the world with a balanced point of view and an attitude of care and an understanding of what true morality is, So.
You nailed it. We are live time living the situation that you just laid out, dealing with quote unquote lack of communication issues and all these things. And I continuously put out the reminder that we can't, there's no reason to be fearful, because the work has already been done within our home. And because Brett has, we have raised the children a certain way to know certain things, and shadow work and truth and morality and trivium. And so all these things are instilled in the child from a very young age. And because of that, we navigate this madness with a little bit of hope, knowing that he holds on to these principles and can kind of decipher and discern for himself what's going on around him, what are mom and dad doing. And so I think that's the biggest focus for us, is the child, as it should be, right? It should definitely be about the kid, and what are you instilling in them to help them navigate through it? Because as adults, we should be able to do what we need to do to navigate through, even though it's total shit. It's totally horrible, but we should have the wherewithal to navigate it. And that's what we have to help them do, because we can't change it. We can't just say, well, we don't really want to be in the court system anymore. It doesn't work that way, right? We're forced.
Yeah, once you enter, you're kind of in it until the
right. You're forced to be in it, and every waking moment and blood, sweat, tear, dollar, and all those things are being. But you're doing it for your child. So, but above and beyond that, it's they are A1 important. Just on their mental state, like you said, you have to pay attention. you got to be paying attention. And we can't always know what's being said outside of our home and what's being filtered into the ears, but at least we know, I have to speak for me. At least we know that the morality and certain things have been taught and instilled, and we know that those are valuable to the child at this age. Like those things are already there. So
Yeah.
hopefully we're going to get through it.
Yeah.
Well, we will get through it. It's just how long until the child is 18? It's
Yeah.
what it feels like sometimes. Like that's how
Exactly.
long you're in the system. That's how I
Yeah.
feel about it, unfortunately.
And that's what I'm saying is like, parents who think that they don't have time to pay enough attention or hear every little single thing. And of course, you probably don't. But I mean, if you can't tell when your kid comes home one day and they say something or they do something that just seems like not their usual typical behavior or something typical that they would say, like that's kind of a red flag to maybe investigate a little bit further into what's happening there. Like, is that a fluke?
Right.
Did they pick something up and bring that home and maybe they didn't fully understand it or whatever? And you gotta talk to your kids about
Yeah,
these things. Yeah.
And
gotta be raw.
creating an atmosphere where they will talk and share, where
Yes.
they
Yeah.
feel safe to
Yes.
be authentic. And, I think that that's sometimes what's not seen is how certain, approaches to parenting that's really control based really shuts kids down and pushes them away from that openness to share.
Right. The
So-
act itself of being engaged in the system creates a division for the child from the parents. So I have the unique opportunity to be a bonus mom and be able to be the ears to a child that doesn't feel comfortable anymore talking to mom or dad. So I can be like that non-biased. I mean, of course I'm biased, but it's like I'm
You're
not
more
them.
neutral.
I'm not the direct parents, but I'm somebody who the child is comfortable coming to because it's been X amount of years, and we've learned truth together, even in the last 5 years and stuff. And so, I would hope that my situation, I would hope that others would be as fortunate to have that, to have somebody, which sometimes that falls upon a therapist or a family therapist, if you can find a good one, to really help you navigate, somebody hopefully that knows a little bit about morality and not fitting into all the little cookie cutter places and medications and things like this. So
Yeah. Do you guys have any last thoughts before we move on to the promised feminist or classical feminist history?
I'll go ahead and say I encourage people to learn about the attachment styles. Try to create a secure sense of attachment with healthy boundaries. I encourage people to practice self-responsibility in every single aspect of your life. And I think women should also learn self-defense. That way, you also, whether you're in the woods with a bird or a man or a bear, like you are safe. Hopefully, I mean, a bear, again, apex predator. Good luck facing, a mama bear, but those will be my final thoughts to share, I think. What about you, Ben? Do you have any?
No, I think she said before moving on. So
Before moving. Okay, well, I think that, you guys, I think I just didn't hear right.
that's okay. It's still a good thought.
So yeah, and I want to just level the playing field out there and put out the question for the men to answer. What would you rather be lost or trapped in the woods with? Would it be a bear or would it be a well-trained, souped up Marine female woman? And what would you guys choose? Somebody who's a well-trained Marine woman or a bear?
Does she want to kill them? I mean,
yeah, like maybe she's all like, roided out. She's all super trained and clever and like knows how to like do all that Rambo stuff. That sounds So I just want to level that playing field out for men who want to answer that question. Um,
It's like just as funny to me, really, and
yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah.
You ask a man, a bear, or Angelina Jolie, and they're just or Laura Croft. Sorry, that's what I should have said.
Either or. Uh, they just pick any celebrity woman, just throw one in. But she's all like the kind of women who are like super buff because they work out like all the time. So they're like the weightlifting women if you've ever seen them, and they're just like they're huge. I'm like,
Yes.
that's, I mean that might be a little bit scary, but
A bit of a
so
sidetrack, a tangent as well.
If you, I guess, just from a man's perspective, or from a man's perspective, the physical intimidation part or a big one, like that's it doesn't matter how big both be a woman. It's like you're not going to be afraid of her. As a former Marine, I can tell you that Marine women it's not so much that they're combat efficient. It's they more have a reputation for being barracks force kind of a lot of the times. So it's not intimidating. A woman, I would say, a more terrifying thing is would a man be, you know, more terrified of a woman who's like manipulative and sly and sneaky, and that will ruin your life
She
and
could break your heart.
financially steal everything from you or cheat on you or steal your child from you. That is a much more terrifying thing from a man's perspective. The physical violence or physical threat that's terrifying from a woman's perspective, but from a man's, it's not.
Okay, so
yeah.
bear or woman with court
Or
order.
a manipulative sociopathic woman. Yeah, that would be a better, more accurate question, I would say.
So which one would you rather deal with?
To be honest, I'd have to, I'd just rather not deal with either of them. But the wild animal is probably at least a little bit more predictable, I guess. But
yeah,
I've
I've heard that argument too.
but at the same time, it's like I said, it's from a human being. It's really one of those things that they're dangerous. They're both dangerous in their own ways.
Yeah,
One
exactly.
may take your life, the other may like ruin your life, and then take your life if she has a life insurance policy on you.
Right, death or slow, painful death.
Yeah, that like that. So yeah.
Okay. I
Yeah,
think we really came full circle. This has been
Yeah.
great.
Valid.
yeah. Let us know what you think, guys, out there. So, as promised, I've got a little bit of history, like we usually do. So I'm going to share my screen again.
I've read it. I'm in a break while you read. Be back.
Okay. Okay, so we started with our history here. Let's talk a little bit about the history of feminism. And the reason for any of our listeners that we put these two things together is because really the man or bear question, it's not really this like, a lot of people feel like it's this very innocent question that they're just throwing out there, to see what people will say. But really, it's just a way to, stir up the waters and make it, it's to spur on all of the modern day, toxic feminism that is going on out there. And some of the history I was able to pull up, this is according to some of this I got from Britannica.com, which is usually a pretty good source. I mean, you can find all the basic kind of information you want. And one of the quotes that I pulled out was the belief in social, economic, and political equality of the sexes, although largely originating in the West. Feminism is manifested worldwide and is represented by various institutions committed to activity on behalf of women's rights and interests. So it started with this, like specifically to, pull out all, the stuff about women, to display that and, show the world that they're part of this community globally. So the movement of feminism has mostly been a large issue in the West. However, this is an issue that has popped up in history from time to time. So this goes back farther than suffrage, which is what most people think is what really primarily started. But there has been, evidence of independent women, even though they were different time periods and women didn't really have this, whatever the same status as men in a lot of places in the world in history. There are women throughout time who have come forward and, stepped up to their own plate and just, made waves in their own way. So throughout most of Western history, women are confined to the domestic sphere, while public life was reserved for, that's supposed to say men, sorry. In medieval Europe, women were denied the right to own property, to study, or to participate in public life. At the end of the 19th century in France, they were still compelled to cover their heads in public, and in parts of Germany, a husband still had the right to sell his wife. Even as late as the early 20th century, women could neither vote nor hold elective office in Europe and in most of the United States, where several territories and states granted women's suffrage long before the federal government did so. So what we learn about the suffrage during that time period where, it really got going, that was not the start of it. It was ramping up. It was building up in little pockets all over the place. So women were prevented from conducting business without a male representative, be it father, brother, husband, legal agent, or even son. Married women could not exercise control over their own children without the permission of their husbands, which is still a thing today in modern society in some countries. Moreover, women had little or no access to education and were barred from most professions. In some parts of the world, such restrictions on women continue today. While this is all true, this is also taken somewhat out of context. Women are naturally inclined to be the main developers within the home, while men are naturally inclined to be the security of it. Throughout all history, women have made their marks in astonishing ways. The reason why it is not taught so readily is because the parasite class wants to keep us divided. So it doesn't want to really show, think about modern day feminism as it is today. How many of them could actually tell you about historical figures that go back even a few hundred years? Any women that actually was, lived independently and did their own thing, where we're just not always, we're not taught these things. So it's very easy to think women are only just getting our rights now. It's very easy to condition people into thinking that way. So, as well as because women tend to be silent workers, the muse behind the voice, we don't always tend to speak out when it is required. But the truth is, women have accomplished great things in our history, even before the suffrage. Women have been leaders, inventors, scientists, spiritual advisors, writers, and many more things. What does it take for a woman to stand on her own, create a balance within the self, have some self-respect for oneself, and to defy an oppressor, which women can be quite good at? Despite some of the injustices done to women, which have been extensive, women are also highly intuitive and creative creatures who have been able to find ways in order to overcome inequality issues. In short, this is not a new concept in the modern day. This movement was a slow-rolling, building snowball down a hillside. Yeah, and you see evidence of that all the time, women influencing their men or whatever, or their the people who are, quote, in charge, and kind of, you know, being that muse behind that. In ancient history, there is evidence that many women have pushed at the agenda and taken a stance against this or that particular issue, starting as far back as the 3rd century BCE. In the late 14th and early 15th century France, the first feminist philosopher, Christine de Pizan, probably didn't pronounce that very well, but challenged prevailing attitudes toward women with a bold call for female education. This was later taken up again by Laura Cereta, a 15th century Venetian woman who published what it translates to is personal letters in 1488, which is a collected letters of a Renaissance feminist. A volume of letters dealing with the panoply of women's complaints, from denial of education and marital oppression to the frivolity of women's attire. By the end of the 16th century, when the one I can't pronounce, which translates to the worth of women in 1600, a feminist broadside by another Venetian woman, Maderda Fonte, so obviously French and Italian, was published. In the late 16th century in England, the first feminist pamphleteer in England, writing as Jane Anger, responded with Jane Anger, her protection. Here we go. Jane Anger, her protection for women in 1589. This volley of opinion continued for more than a century until another English author, Mary Estelle, issued a more reasoned rejoinder in a series of proposals to the ladies in 1694 and 1697. So we have it even written in our history as far back, pretty far back, where women were really just stepping up to the plate and be like, no, maybe you can push around the majority right now, but you're not going to push me around, and I'm going to do whatever I want. Anyway, I'm going to put out that book I want. I'm going to, be a voice. The feminist voices of the Renaissance never coalesced into a coherent philosophy or movement. This happened only with the Enlightenment, a European intellectual movement of the 17th and 18th centuries, in which ideas concerning God, reason, nature, and humanity were synthesized into a worldview that gained wide assent in the West. And that instigated revolutionary developments in art, philosophy, and politics. Central to Enlightenment thoughts were the use and celebration of reason, the power by which humans understand the universe to improve their own condition. Almost sounds like philosophies that you might pull from natural law. The goals of rational humanity were considered to be knowledge, freedom, and happiness. Initially, the movement focused on the inequalities of social class and caste to the exclusion of gender. Olympe de Gouges, a noted playwright, published Declaration that translates in English to Declaration of the Rights of Women and the Female Citizen in 1791, declaring women to be not only man's equal, but his partner, not his better. See the difference of that. The following year, Mary Wollstonecraft published a Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792, the seminal English language language feminist work was published in England. The Age of Enlightenment turned into an era of political revolutions in France, Germany, and Italy, and the rise of abolitionism. In the United States, feminist activism took root when female abolitionists sought to apply the concepts of freedom and equality to their own social and political situations. By the mid-19th century, issues surrounding feminism started to take root in large ways and stand on its own. In July of 1848, in the small town of Seneca Falls, New York, the first meeting was held by a number of women. Lucerietta Mott, a Quaker preacher and veteran social activist, Martha Wright, Mott's sister, Marianne McClintock, Jane Hunt, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the wife of an abolitionist, and the only non-Quaker in the group, and it started with them placing a small ad in the local paper. So what we know how the suffrage, how it actually started, was just a community group. That's all it took, was a group of people who just happened to be women who got together and say enough, and they put out some little ad in the local paper, and that got the ball rolling, so it became a bigger movement. Stanton drew up the Declaration of Sentiments, a document outlining the rights that American women should be entitled to as citizens. For the Seneca Falls Convention, and inspired by the Declaration of Independence as her tool to state that all men and women had been created equal. She drafted 11 resolutions. Along with Frederick Douglass, a former slave, arguing eloquently on their behalf, all 11 resolutions passed, and Mott even won approval of a final declaration for the overthrowing of the monopoly of the pulpit and for the securing to women equal participation with men in the various trades, professions, and commerce. So I will put that more. There's so much to it. It's just like vast how much information there is. So I'll put that link in the descriptions. So my final thought for this is, in our modern history, this is where the education on feminism begins. It's typically what you might hear about briefly in the public school education, if they even teach that anymore. We touched on it a little bit when I was still in middle school. From here, the movement has become what I would call a joke, with the parasite class conditioning women to become toxic within themselves and to automatically hate and fear men. It is a growing sickness that is creating mental illness, perhaps one that may be too late to be reversed. So here's the challenge we need to take up. The only reason I can see for this to be happening at all is to create further division of the sexes and to ensure that men and women will forever be enemies on a spiritual level. All I can see here is the same old tactic of divide and conquer. This is age-old and has been practiced on the citizens on a global scale for as long as we have written history, and probably even well before that. Now that we have all that under our mental belt, let's return to the topic of man and bear, which we have discussed extensively, and see if we can investigate this a little further. So everybody out there, tell us what you think. And and, is this just a silly trend, or will it pass and the no evil intentions, or where do you really think it's going to be going? So stop the share on that. So what do you guys think of that? That was just a little bit of the history that I pulled out, but there was pages and pages and pages and pages of this stuff. And I didn't want to put in too much, of course, because that could be time consuming to read out, but there you go. A little bit of history of where the feminism movement really kind of started.
I didn't realize that it went back so far. I've just seen a lot of the modern stuff. I and the patterns of behavior and how it's just like everywhere. And it seems to be more dominant and predominant. And so I didn't actually realize it went back as far as what it did.
No, I mean, there's been a long history. If you, I mean, you can go back even further. If you can go all the way back to like the Greek philosopher and an astrologer and astronomer Hypatia, all the way back in the city of Alexandria. Christians ended up, killing and mutilating her because of that. And I think that's one thing to highlight, look at too. When we're looking at Western culture, it's more of once the Abrahamic influence was brought into European and Western culture, then did the control of women come in. If you actually look at the societies, more pagan, more animistic societies pre-Abrahamic influence, not so much the case actually, and in different places of the world. So I think that's something to keep in mind. That is, especially modern feminism has this fundamental presumption built under it that women were oppressed at all times, everywhere, throughout history, the culture, and that simply wasn't the case. But it's interesting to see where the history of it had developed. Women in the Western culture, went from used to having many more rights to going through periods of hundreds of years of having those removed away and then having to go back in order to gain those back. But it's like, where has that genuine struggle been taken and twisted and warped in order to cause division? I think that's the point that really becomes more interesting to highlight and study.
Yeah, that's a good point to point out that history is written to make it look like women have always been oppressed throughout our entire history, and it isn't true. That's not true at all. And many women have become, quite the leaders. I mean, and yeah, more like when you get more state approved, you got governments coming in, you got state approved religions coming in and really controlling the narrative. People start to change how sometimes the crowds, really, it's really just the mob that changes their behavior. How in what happened, it was, through the whole witchcraft trials. Before, it was medicine women who were, looked for and honored, and, they were treated just, like the doctor of the village or whatever. And then you got, the state approved boss coming in and saying, no, they're evil. And it's like, demons and stuff. So they start like burning women at the stake. So it wasn't always like that. And it would be, I think, good to point out that even during periods where we had like periods of women being oppressed, it was like not necessarily the case where the majority of men or other women were oppressing women, because that was a thing, but, husbands didn't necessarily treat their wives like they were unequal to them or property. They went by the guidelines of whatever society was telling them, which isn't necessarily ethical at the time, whatever the time period is. But in the home, they're treating their wife like they're an equal part. So it goes to show that I think the majority didn't really want to have that. Like the majority of men, I don't think, would have done that. Like that was all instigated by like a higher, more powerful institution coming in, all being manipulated.
I wish I could be Michael Tessarion right now to talk about what he says about, we go way, way, way back. It all seems very inverted because I think females were probably running the show more often than not, long, long, long before our time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just a serious inversion and a conditioned, textbooks put out to the masses for how long now. And we all, the victor writes the story or what have you. So I just see a lot of inversion there. I don't think that the feminine leadership was good. That I speak, but I'm not like not to stand on it like, oh, women were actually the leaders. I think that it probably was some super toxic bad forces going on, and maybe just putting the man as the mouthpiece out in front, but there's a woman behind pulling the strings, which makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it's it does take, I think, a real stepping back and looking at the big picture view, right, over history, and then to open our minds to this idea that there is a predator class, that there is an intentional agenda of evil, you know, of seeing humans, not just women, but humans as prey and as almost like not equal to that class of people, that cabal that is feeding off of us, right? And I think that it's essential for them to have power, that women and men are not in harmony with each other, because I think the potential power of unified men and women is phenomenal and would be more powerful, and it would be a threat to anything trying to subvert and threaten our families. And I see that as the real issue is not like patriarchy, but Satanism. It's this self-centered sort of rather, you know, evil-minded agenda to form humanity into a form that they are benefiting from, and that's really nothing to do with our well-being or our health. So we all have to be really aware and look out for those tricks along the way. And I don't, like Bryan said, I don't think that it's natural or organic for men and women to be so polarized. I think that's a manipulated effect of this social programming and engineering over time, you know, much time, longer than we realize. And that part of our goal is not to play along in a system, you know, in this like polarized way, but to pop out of it into our true potential and power. And so when I was young, you know, I had an awareness that as a girl, at least in my school, in my community, that I didn't seem to be given the same importance in some way. What I did didn't seem, my goals didn't seem, my athletic potential, whatever, wasn't really given as much attention as the guys, right? And it became really important to me somehow to prove that I could be just as good as a guy. I could do as many pull-ups, I could do push-ups, you know, and it became this thing about like the physical. And because I was athletic, I could compete somewhat to a point, right, before getting squashed. But also intellectually, like my intellect was never fed. It wasn't acknowledged as a kid. And I don't even know if the boys were, honestly, because part of the problem is the school system. And so way that we were been tricked and inverted as women who are seeking like equality and the freedom to have our best life is being told that the measurement is like we get to vote and we get to go have equal access to schools. But then, oh, bummer, like all of that is a big manipulation of the dark occultist, basically, that is like, that's not really where you get power. That's where you get mind controlled. That's where you get tricked into thinking that, you know, your vote actually means something in this particular government you know, set up. And so, yeah, there's a lot to it. It's complex. And I think that really we need to get out of the system as it currently stands and not participate in and not fall for the bait. Right. And then come back to real dialogue and real open-minded communication and listening among each other. Because as men and women, if we can come together and understand each other and say, oh shit, we've both been duped. Our brains have been fucked with for thousands of years. And like, what the fuck? Why are we arguing with each other? Let's get on the same page and let's face together to the actual predators that are trying to destroy us and our society and our potential. So,
yeah, great point for people to consider there is that the majority of us, men or women, we don't really go have the mindset, I think, that, oh, other people are not equal to us. You got like those percentages of people who are radicalists and whatever, idea they have. But it's such a small percentage really that it's like it almost doesn't matter, and but really if you really were to dismantle a person individually, you'd find they don't really want to be disconnected from other people. And it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. And we really, if you go deep enough, you're like, yeah, well, I do consider men and women to be equal. And the enemy shouldn't be one, it shouldn't be women or it shouldn't be men. There's only one real enemy, and that's the parasite class. And a psychopath is a psychopath is a psychopath. So it doesn't matter if they're man, woman, alien, fucking space creature. It doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
That's the real enemy that we should be turning on, not on each other.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say, and in my kind of naivete, going forward, thinking that I could have it all, do it all. And I think that didn't, it included a bit of a lack of reality about what does it really take to raise a child. And can you raise a child in the most optimal way when you're plugging into that system that is saying that as a woman you should work out of the home? It's almost like saying that to be an equal woman you need to be like a man, and you need to do the things that men do. So it's not about really valuing true feminine qualities or more natural tendencies of the feminine, or it's about plugging into this social economic system as if that's your equality. But that's actually damaging all of us, and especially our children, I think. I'm curious to hear you guys' comments on that.
Actually, that's very interesting that you use the word socialist. There's this speaker called Yeonmi Parks, and she's a defector who fled North Korea. And she said that when they first started moving in socialism, which there it's just like hardcore communism, but they call it socialism. She said that one of the things that they pushed were equal rights for everybody. And that as soon as women could do exactly the same things as men, they kept holding women to that standard. And well, now anyone could be a slave, labor camp worker. Doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, you can do it. We live in a socialist paradise. And, they totally take out words like sadness, depression, love. They don't actually use those. Those words are void from their society. So I think it was just fascinating to hear you mention that, because yes, before communism, socialism will come, and it's a lot of I just see a lot of feminists kind of ushering in these things. They want equal rights, except when it comes to plumbing and automotive care and getting drafted to war. But inch by inch, step by step, women allowing and giving permission to this kind of thing, it could lead to other places. So
yeah,
I just think it's fascinating because you could see that in other parts of the world who have integrated other economic societies.
There's never been a communist or socialist system that has come into power without the assistance of women. They have to do that. If you even look at like the modern Democrat Party and the voting regulations, they couldn't exist if it wasn't for women.
Wow.
They would not be a viable party. The only reason they're viable at all is because there is the single women overwhelmingly will vote Democrat if you break down the demographics. And these are also the same women that are demonizing men, mutilating their children, doing all the other terrible things we were talking about for that. So there's a very strong connection with what happens when unhealthy women can get into a place of power in society. And there's some interesting correlations to say it's like where society actually functions much better in a what most people would consider a conservative or traditional
A more
setting
natural
that's
state
more
of being.
natural, exactly, where you have families, mothers and fathers raising children, continuing to pass on their genetics and pass on their culture. That's a sustainable thing. But if you look at like what the modern system and much of that system is actually driven by women, it is a self-destructing system that cannot continue to exist. They have to constantly recruit new kids or recruit new members because they can't continue to do that themselves.
Or even if you look at like the Holocaust and giant genocides that happened. In like we've said in past episodes that like behind every strong man is a strong woman. You know, a lot of men, in order to do certain atrocities and terrible things, you know, they had women pushing certain ideologies, and then men want to protect them, so they save them from all the gory stuff. But they do what women, yeah, the approval, the permission.
And that's something to actually to mention too. If we want to look at, for example, like the Holocaust is a specific example. I have a good book called Hitler's Furies, which is all about the role of women in Nazi Germany, and it's not just that they're secretaries and nurses and doing all these roles of pushing the paperwork of how many people are going on the train. They can participate in genocide just as equally, but there were actually women guard and soldiers that would actually be just as cruel or more cruel than the male SS guards that were at the camps. Actually, many Holocaust survivors would actually speak. They were more afraid of the female guards. They would actually be far more cruel.
Wow.
So women are just as capable of committing atrocities, genocide, and everything. And it's not just in the support of men and the culture that does it, but they will actually participate in these acts themselves. A woman can pull a trigger or conduct a medical experiment just as easily as a man can.
And
I
women
believe that.
attack other women, you know.
Yes.
And talking with a woman who was working in like probation as a newer probation officer, and she was telling me stories about the other women and how cruel and abusive and condescending that the women were to her in particular. And you know, she was razzed and harassed in different ways by the men as well. And she was small, she was petite, and she was put into dangerous situations. And this was done in collaboration by both the male and female other senior probation officers. So it's like really sick within these systems. There's no safety, you know, really you can say from a woman, like because someone's a woman, that you can feel safe, you know, and the way these systems have become so sick. You know, Bryan, I'm curious go ahead, Brittany.
I was just real quick, just gonna say there's no way they pulled off Hitler's youth programs without the mothers, and that's what effectively changed the culture and the ideas and the conditioning. That was everything. The propaganda was everything that made everything turn. And that's rooted in the families, in the homes, just like it is today. But it's the mothers behind it. It had to have been. It wasn't like all the dads were like, get your butt to Hitler's Youth today. You know, it was like moms were there. They were all there running it, doing it.
Most of the fathers were deployed.
Yeah.
Yep. They're dropping their kids off at, you know, Hitler's day camp.
Right.
And
just like dropping our kids off at public school. To me, it's so similar.
And it was the same during the witchcraft trials all through Europe and America. There were Puritan women who were being like, yeah, this bitch over here's a witch. So I need you, my husband, who's whatever authority figure, to go and like, or like, you know, probably more often or not, the husband like knocked up the witch. So now she's a witch and we got to get rid of her. So
women against women is a big part of this history.
Yeah. Here today.
What was your question, Leslie?
Well, I know that you have a lot of history about the American, you know, the creation of America, you know, and the Federalist Papers and all of that. And what's your understanding of the role in women and the view of women, you know, in that whole process?
So actually, and this is something that, you know, the modern left would love to destroy, but not only the role of women, but the role of other minorities in the founding of our nation. You know, the first victim of the Revolutionary War was actually a black man who was a slave who had run away and become a free man and was working with others. And he was just as pissed off at the British for violating the rights of others. And he got a group of other men that were mixture, white, other black men, and they went down there and confronted the British. And he was actually the very first casualty of the Revolutionary War. We had many women that were not only in supportive roles of, just basic things, providing food, shelter, clothing. These are things that no army can fight a battle without support, without someone to take care of the wounded, without somebody to help get supplies, without just the support of women in general socially. There's many different factors, and there were actually many different prominent women that were even very successful businesswomen in the Revolutionary War and even leading up to the Civil War that were extremely intricate in changing and shaping our country. You were mentioning, Sarah, in some of your reading, the abolitionist movement. There was a lot of women in the abolitionist movement because many women saw the struggle of the slaves similar to the struggle of their own. So that was a cause that they united with, and that's actually what led to the founding of the Republican Party in 1854. It was founded as an abolitionist party. And I think, it's obviously maybe lost its way, but I think a lot of people forget that history. So the role of women and both minorities as well were very intricately tied in. And there's many stories throughout the beginning of the Revolutionary War of the roles that women played that I think are just ones that were overlooked because they don't want to teach that in history books. They want to teach the story that America was founded by a bunch of rich white men, slave owners that were the patriarchy and they were oppressing everybody else. That is not the case at all of our country. We have always been a very complex country and an amalgamation of many different people with many different ideas and beliefs and philosophy, but that were united around a central belief of natural law and human rights and the fact that we all are equal. As a country, why we've not always met that standard the way we should, we have always strove for it. That's something that, Frederick Douglass spoke about. A lot of people, especially in the anarchist community and stuff, will actually like to think Frederick Douglass was an anarchist and didn't believe in government. That's actually not the case at all. For a period of time, he had the position, and later on in his writings and his speeches, as much as he criticized the government, he also said that very point. We should strive for the ideals, the perfect ideals that this document lays out. We haven't been meeting the bar as we should. We've been failing. We're saying we're a country that believes in freedom, but we've been enslaving others. Rather than trashing the whole thing and the whole concept, we need to raise the bar and actually hold ourselves to our own standard. And that was more of the position that he ended on later in his life.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I'm gonna have to hit you up for a list of books
Yeah, I
to read about all that stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, because this is it's part of our history, and to know that stuff really changes, or it should change, how we go about doing things instead of being so hard stance on this, that, or whatever. It's got to be this way. It's got to be this. Is so hardcore without having the ability or being willing to have the ability to be able to be okay. We can open this door and explore that or whatever, and just being able to bend a little bit and understand and thinking about people think as far as with the government and the Constitution and all the Bill of Rights, people, I keep hearing people wanting to lay it out as oh, this is just a hardcore form of or softcore form of trying to control us, and that's what's supposed to be telling us the rights. It's not really for that, as far as I see.
not at all.
It's training wheels. It's training wheels for all the people out there who cannot be at a level quite yet for the anarchist utopia. It's training wheels. That's what our founding fathers, I feel, did.
And for me, over the years, when you're familiar, I've had an anarchist for years. I would say I'm actually more of a libertarian or a minarchist now. I've actually come to agree much more with the founding fathers after studying their work. Even if you look at, and I've done presentations on this before where I spoke about government and anarchy not actually being necessarily mutually exclusive. The context being that it has to be voluntary. But no matter what in society, no matter if you want a advanced or successful society at all, there has to be mutual cooperation and there has to be systems involved in order for that cooperation to exist, and do that for people to be able to make decisions and do that. And most people can't agree on basic things. So you have to have some sort of voluntary system that people are agreeing to be able to go along with, and that's why the American system and experiment is so unique, is because it is not this system designed around oppression. It is a system that is designed around representation and the protection of your natural rights. And for each individual to be able to have representation in that system and to say for how society is going to be governed, the mutual rules that we're going to agree on, these type of things. Because whether, and I think this is something many in the anarchist community overlook, is that, society doesn't just magically organize itself.
Nope.
There is a lot of very complex things that it takes to run society at the level that we have now. And even, simple things like having borders for your country so you're not being invaded. That's a position. I've definitely changed my position on that from an anarchist. We're like, nope, no, having open borders, that's a terrible fucking idea. That actually helps with trafficking. That actually helps all sorts of other crime that results in people being raped and murdered to death and overdosing on fentanyl and doing all sorts of other terrible things. And that's just in this one issue. But if you look throughout history, never once has a society that embraced that open border concept survived.
Yeah.
They've always been destroyed. So I, like I said, I am much more what I would consider more of a libertarian or a minarchist now, and people can get mad at that, whatever it is. But natural law based. Everything should always be based on natural law. Everything should always be voluntary. But we do have to have some sort of structure to organize society.
And our founding fathers, you would probably know who said it. They knew that people were likely to try to control and misuse and abuse the system in place. But that is also why they set it up as they did. They did it so that we would always have the ability to come back and have a system that honors our natural rights. It doesn't really work properly if we don't learn about it. You can't protect something you don't know you have. So if you don't know that you have a system that is designed to keep you safe along with your freedoms, then you're just going to think, you're not going to be able to protect what you don't know. And since we've had a more free society, people don't think that there's a reason to learn about these things. It's boring, and so they don't know about that. And so they are very easily manipulated. Our system is very easily abused. It is infiltrated in many, many ways with our representatives. And people are so ignorant, all put together. They're very ignorant of the processes and systems in place that are set up in their own best interest. They don't know about them.
I look at it like you could take the metaphor of a car, right? You could have a car, it's designed to run, it's designed to do a specific job in a specific way. But say you just allow someone else to take the car and you never maintain it and you just let them run it into the ground. Does that mean the car is inherently wrong? Or does it mean that you were not responsible enough and you allowed people that did wrong things to take control of the car? You can't bitch about the car driving off a cliff if you refuse to drive it yourself and you just gave it and that's kind of more of the position I've come to over the last few years.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So what do you think the missing piece was? Was it the education of natural law?
Education, absolutely. Our founding fathers said this over and over and over again, that the key to society remaining free is that people are educated.
Now we're not.
That is the best defense for society, is an educated population that cares. But a population that is ignorant and apathetic will always enslave itself no matter what system it has.
Enslave itself.
Like,
it's a collective thing. We are enslaving ourselves. Nobody is above us. They can set the trap, but if we're dumb enough to fall for it, whose fault is it? Ours. Yeah. So we are responsible. It's not anybody else's fault. And it's our responsibility to learn about the processes so that we can actually use it to its highest benefit for all of our benefit.
Yeah, I agree with all of that completely. When you don't maintenance, then your house falls apart.
If you,
And it's
And
this
it's
idea of stewardship too, stewarding this like gift, I guess, that the founding fathers set up for us, stewarding our children, stewarding our own mental health, stewarding the relationships among us, right? And it's a different spirit.
people may not like, especially, more of the anarchist community stuff. They may be very critical of the government here in the West, and for good reason,
Fair.
right? But you also have to look at, like, most of them haven't actually studied a lot of the rest of the world. Study radical Islam and see what they
Yeah.
think. Study
That's
radical
scary.
communism and see
Real
how that
scary.
system is. You study, some of the systems and the dictators that take charge in
North
places
Korea.
like Africa or these other systems. America, why it has its faults, is definitely the most fertile ground for freedom and liberty to take hold. That there are other ideologies and other places in the world where that is not the case. And do we need to fix what we have here? Absolutely. Do we need to rot out corruption, arrest corrupt people, execute ones that were harming children? Absolutely. We need to clean house, gut the government. I'm more of a if people are familiar with Vivek Ramaswamy, that's more of the type of politician or leader I'm saying we need, which is, we do need to drastically reduce what it is, but at the same time, we need to make sure we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I don't think a lot of anarchists have actually got actually realistic about how they would solve problems in there.
No,
One
they
thing
can't solve their lives.
I've been, kind of quiet on my criticisms of it, but over the last few years, I've watched how is the anarchist community responding to the problems like the open border and terrorist infiltration and mass human trafficking and these type of things that they used to criticize. For example, like under the Trump administration, they used to separate children when they came in, and they would run a DNA test
to make sure they
to make sure that they're actually with their family. As soon as the Biden administration came in, they got rid of that. And I'm not getting into the left right thing, but I'm just pointing out that certain policies, having those in place, actually helps save real lives.
Yeah.
It gets real children out of humanity. Those are real fucking problems, and I'm not seeing solutions actually put out there in a realistic, viable way by the community. And that is much more why I've become more to a libertarian or minarchist position, because people do deserve to live in safety. We do need to stop terrible drugs like fentanyl coming across the border, and people can say whatever they want about drugs, but that's not a recreational drug. That is a poison
Wait until
that is being put out by the Communist Party from China in order to specifically weaken our society. And if our society goes, there's no other real great bastions of freedom in the world other than Western civilization.
We cannot.
Who are armed.
We were the first civilization to give women rights. We were the first civilization to get rid of slavery, and to actually build a successful civilization built on liberty. There was no other civilization that ever founded their government based off of freedom documents and the idea of liberty. And I think that's something worth fighting for and preserving. And yes, just because sick, corrupt people have taken it over, it's only because we've allowed that to happen. So that's more of where we're falling on things now.
I could not agree with all of that more. And it's a perspective that, you're right. I think a lot of these communities, people they're not looking at it that way. They're not understanding that. Before we had inequality for women in America, before we had slavery in America, that stuff was all over the world. It was before America. And, people who were coming here, yes, there was, of course, corruption, and there was all of that involved. And there always will be, but the majority of people who were trying to get to America during that era, even to find freedom, to find liberty, was because they were escaping the freaking socialist or communist shit that they had wherever they came from.
It's still out there.
The Catholic Church or oppression of some kind, right?
Yes, people died. They sacrificed. They willingly said, yeah, if I die during this boat trip or whatever to get to this place that's supposed to be, away from this,
Life
give
was
me
so
a little.
bad they were willing to take that risk, though.
Yeah, I wouldn't be alive. I wouldn't exist if that didn't happen. I know specific stories of my ancestry, and I wanted to just share, one on. I want to back on Mark Passio's final show today. He put a shout out about the founding fathers and emphasized how good their intentions were, the vision, and he kind of defended that. I just want, and he's ultimately, teaching about anarchy, but he really made that point that about us being that having this opportunity you just described, Bryan. And I think that, to me, I see it as this ideal that's philosophically based, and then it's the reality that we're in, and the level of unconsciousness and the level of just chaos and confusion, and how do we get from here to there? It's not going to be like an instant that everybody's understanding anarchy and living that way, right? There has to be a process, and I think that what you're describing is something that's more reality based, and it's emphasizing something that was decently set up for success if we can come back to the principles that underlie their plan, right? And I think I've been studying history as well, which I recommend everybody really find, a variety of sources to study the history. And I was, studying about the colonization of, small islands and things. And I asked myself, like, whoa, that people on that island could be perfectly cooperative and peaceful people, but how do they protect themselves against invasion?
Dominant force coming in.
That's how
exactly.
countries and
The
things.
predator.
That's why people started. People used to have those same things. There were villages that were warring, and so they picked a leader, and that leader helped inspire armies, and people made their own countries, and that's kind of how it all started.
And if you don't have a means to protect yourself, and you're technologically insufficient, you set yourself up to be conquered.
Yeah.
Like people want to talk about, for example, the white European man came in and conquered, the Native Americans. Well, one, it wasn't such a black and white thing. Native Americans were warring amongst themselves throughout the entirety of their history before we got here. But, imagine, Europeans had never showed up, that North America was never touched, and the rest of the world continued to develop. Well, what would happen if they had never been discovered, never been touched? They would still be in the Stone Age today. They got conquered, and this may sound mean and harsh, but they got conquered because they were so technologically behind the rest of the world. Africa had metallurgy, Asia, Europe, they all did. They all had far more technological advances. They had organized into countries and nations more. They had ships that could cross the oceans. The Native Americans didn't have any of that. They were still effectively living in the Stone Age as hunters and gatherers. And people can have their perspective, and there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, that does not actually create a society that's going to keep you safe if someone else decides to
Left
invade
them
you.
vulnerable.
And that's just the fact of what it is. So, if you want to have a productive society that continues on and will last for a long time, which is what any human being wants, they want to establish legacy. That requires some sort of system and organization to where not only can you organize your society and take care of the infrastructure and the things you need to within that society, but that you can collectively defend yourself if another culture or another type of society tries to take your rights from you.
Yeah, I agree. You have to have some kind of basis in like some kind of knowledge with technology or how to do things. And so for anybody listening, because I know most people are going to go straight to, oh, technology is like computers and programs and, nukes and all that stuff. Technology is like what we create. It's like technology is like our knife and fork that we eat our dinner with. It's like the weapons we create, whatever air with whatever knowledge and, inspiration we get. It's like, it's the, kind of vehicles we make, that's what technology is. Even like the clothes that we wear is a form of technology and how we use that. So technology has in itself, we've always had that. And it's because human beings are innovative and we're creative and we create something,
We're
even
based species.
Yes, medicine,
everything we do
technology
is a tool of some sort.
Yeah, exactly.
Some sort of tool.
And it just matters how you use it, you know, like
Yes.
a fork is a piece of technology that somebody invented because they wanted to figure out how to eat their food a little bit easier, maybe without their hands or whatever, you know, but you know, it's like a lot of technology also has like, you know, double uses, like
Yeah.
so that's important too for people to keep in mind.
And that level of technology can expand and exponentially, right? And that is one aspect of like our human intellectual ability. And what is that which kind of tempers the abuse of the potential power of any technology is consciousness and morality, and having a basis of moral decision making and the recognition in the equal right to live of all people. It's the twisted thinking that one class of people has more rights than another, or that is somehow more human than other people that you degrade as non-human. Those are the fallacies that then led to people doing wrongdoings and exploiting innocent people because of their, you know, and abuse their power to get their own financial gain, right? So to me, it does come down to that basis of natural law and moral decision making, and the care and the understanding of equality and the value of life.
Britt, do you have any thoughts you
Nope,
want to throw in?
Nope, it's just I'm very grateful to sit here and just listen to you all conversate here on the last
Big,
half.
beautiful discussion today.
Yeah.
Lots
been
of
good.
kind of topics that, you know, are different, but all kind of connected.
Yeah. All of the problems I see all of the problems we have in the modern day kind of, if you were to dig deep enough, or kind of leading back down this, you know, down the same paths. And we just need to start recognizing it. And like you guys were saying, yeah, there's always going to be corrupted people out there. There's always going to be greedy people. There's going to be psychopaths. There's going to be people who are going to take advantage of situations. But it's down to education, and it's down to whether or not we're going to put up with it.
Yeah.
So we are the factor in that. So it's like, you know, I had to learn it like a long time ago from my own personal life. Like, I don't let people push me around. And, you know, more of my, you know, potential, I mean, I wouldn't call them an enemy, but the potential factor of the people who might take advantage of me, of like whatever my insecurities are, my weaknesses are, like medical professionals. And I had to learn for my own individual self how to hold my own and say, no, I'm not going to put up with this, that, or the other thing. And everybody that's a personal thing, and everybody on an individual level has to make that decision, that even if they have timid tendencies, or, you know, they don't want to like cause waves, they're afraid of causing waves, or they're afraid of even when you're afraid of the potential reaction of the other person, still gotta, if you want a world that's based in like freedom and equality and,
Right.
you know, truth, essentially, you gotta be able to hold your own individually first. You can't, like, nobody who can't hold their own, these are not necessarily people who can fight for anybody else. So it has to start with the individual first, I think.
And recognize that we do have vulnerable people like children and elders and, you know, disabled individuals who may need protection or do need protection. And that is the masculine principle that we want to support and empower and invite and stand behind. Right. You know, we need the masculine in presence in the woods with us, you know, when we're, you know, venturing into the wilderness, and,
yeah,
you know, if we want to be safe.
That's it.
Yeah. I wanted to just really thank Bryan for being here today and joining us. value
Yeah.
Yes, thank
what you
you.
have to share and offer, and want to encourage your voice, yeah, so thank
Yeah.
you. It's great
Yeah.
for bringing him in. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in and joining in the girls club. You're you're you've been allowed into the clubhouse.
Thank you.
One of the handful of boys. So I just like really appreciate that too. And I want to, if anybody wants to do a last minute thought that they want to put out there, and I want to kind of showcase Bryan just recently, was it just recently or not too recently, but wrote a book, and it's a pretty awesome book. So I would like him to talk a little bit about that as well.
Sure. Yeah, so I released it, if you want to, I guess. So I released it last year. It's called The Manifestation Map, Unlocking the Magic of the Cosmos, but it's really built around, I wrote it as an introductory book to natural law. And I include anything from, the standard 7 Hermetic principles to natural laws, universal principles I've discovered myself, Vedic philosophy, the trivium. It's kind of an amalgamation or an eclectic collection of knowledge, but that I wrote in a very simple way. I tried not to make it extremely esoteric or, something that only people that have studied the occult for a long time could understand. I wrote it in the way that I wanted any person, whether they're familiar with the occult, natural law, with it, who've never heard of it before, they could pick it up, read it, and see in a very practical, logical way, oh, this makes sense. Oh, I see how this works. And they can start getting the foundational knowledge to understanding our universe. Because really, when you understand natural law at its foundation, every other situation then becomes much easier to comprehend and to be able to work through.
What's the name of it again, Bryan?
I failed to mention.
What was
Say that again. I'm sorry.
what was the name of it again? If you could just
It's called
repeat
The
it.
Manifestation Map, Unlocking
Okay.
the Magic of the Cosmos.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll
We
definitely
should put a link, right?
yeah,
You can find it at Barnes and Nobles or Walmart, or it's available at a bunch of different stores.
I'm gonna definitely put in a link in the description, so guys, to go and check that out for sure. And it'll be in the Substack as well, with all of the writing that we did. And anybody do you have anything else you would want to tell us? I like the idea that you made the book where it's not like super like in the zone of like, super highly occulted type
I
of
wanted it to be
information and
for
worded
your
that way.
average person. My
Yeah.
goal is to teach esoteric truth in an exoteric way is kind of my
Yeah.
mind it. And really as far as final thoughts on the subject of men and women, sovereignty, all these type of things, it all comes down to knowledge, healthy boundaries, healthy sense of self. It's the purpose of why we're all here, which is bettering ourselves. And I really think if we want to fix our society, not only does that start on the level of the individual, but then from then on, it extends out to finding a healthy spouse to be with, to raise healthy children with, in order to start fixing these issues. Because the issues we are seeing in society fundamentally come down to the breakdown of the family unit, the not understanding natural law, being out of alignment with that. And when we understand natural law, we automatically understand the purpose of the family unit and how central and foundational that is to having a healthy society. So I guess my bit of advice would be to, better yourself, raise healthy families, and make natural law, universal law, the foundation of everything in your life.
Yeah, I agree.
Well said. And he's also an astrologer, a Vedic astrologer. Like that a little bit too.
I'm biased, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Leslie or Brittany, do you have any final thoughts?
Just a thank you from me. It's really awesome to see you two together. Definitely a beautiful connection, and it's so powerful how proud you are of each other. So I just want to make sure you know that I see it.
Appreciate you.
I see you look at each other when the other one speaks, and it's really beautiful. And you're proud of the other one, and that is, I share the same thing with Brett, so I understand it, and that's probably why I see it. But I just want to make sure that you hear it, and thank you so much for.
Thank you for that reflection.
Beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's all for me. Today was awesome.
It was a good discussion.
Leslie?
I'm just really happy to be a part of these conversations, and I appreciate that we get into these topics, that are difficult in some ways, or sensitive, and I think that takes courage, getting out here in a public forum and being willing to speak from an alternative point of view, one that goes against the mainstream and that challenges it. And just want to encourage more people to do the same and to be inspired from our courage, really, and know that there is camaraderie in that and some real beauty. So I'm really glad to be a part of it. And sorry, I was in and out a bit. I had a few obligations on my end, but I'm really glad I could be here for most of this conversation. And my work can be found at AliveThrive.life, also part of a podcast called Dissolving the Divide, as well as the Girls Club. And yeah, let's support each other in promoting our work, because it is very shadow banned, and it certainly doesn't come up on the front page of your Google search. So
yeah. You got to star those pages in your web browser. And, and supporting each other's work. I mean, it's not just Bryan and the family who's an author. Brittany also put out a cookbook, which is really good. So I would suggest people go and check out Brittany's tap link, where she has a link that goes to that cookbook as well, where you can help them out and get some great recipes from that. But yeah, I would just say for all the women, and especially the younger women out there, and maybe even the older women who have some traumatic history behind them, I would just say that you don't allow fear to control your decisions or how you move forward, and that to practice like you would practice riding a bicycle. Practice the skill set of your thoughts, emotions, and actions, and in that order, and in the most authentic way that you can, however that works out, because it's all going to be different for all of us. We all express uniquely in that way. So don't be afraid to really explore and, really dive deep. And it's okay. It's kind of lonely if you end up being alone in that journey when you're, touching base, you're reevaluating yourself, and you're going more inward, and you're figuring out who you really are. That can be lonely, yes, but it's not always lonely. And the moment you stop trying to find this, say perfect mate out there, which I think women do that, even the women who are afraid, they have a fear, built up with them against men or women or whoever. They're still trying to find that person, that mate, that best friend to be with. And because don't be in a rush to do that. If you just let go and stop trying to create that, trying to force it into your life, it's going to come to you naturally, because the self-development that you do on yourself is going to naturally attract the same like-minded kind of individual who is in that same track. And you're going to have a healthier, and you're going to have a happier, and you're going to have a more, you won't just have a partner or a spouse. You'll have a best friend. You'll have an actual mate. And that's where it really comes down to, and, Brittany has that with Bryan, and Britt has that with her partner, and I have that with my husband, and Leslie has that with Chris. And, it's just, you got to let these things be natural, and don't let fear control how you conduct yourself. It's okay to be afraid. but don't let it control you.
Very well said.
Yeah, it's been a good combo.
Yeah. So
All
thank
right.
you. Thank you everybody for watching. Thank you, Bryan, for joining us. And thank you again, all you beautiful ladies. You guys are just all amazing. And Bryan, I'm going to be hitting you up for that book list. We're almost to the 3-hour mark, which is a
I
a record for us.
Record.
No, they're like, did my parents die?
Like, sorry guys. Sorry guys, we don't have any slides for you. Just a bunch of like crap I wrote down. So till next time, thank you guys so much for watching. Look for the links and go and check all those things out. And until next month, we will see you then.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.